I had always known the homeowners association in our neighborhood was a ticking time bomb, but I managed to ignore them until the day I couldn't anymore. That day started like any other. I left work later than usual, hoping to enjoy a quiet evening at home. But as I turned onto Sycamore Lane and my house came into view, I immediately knew something was wrong. I slowed the car to a crawl. My front yard, once lined with towering elms and ancient oaks, trees that had stood sentinel for generations, was barren. Nothing remained but stumps and scattered branches. My breath caught. For a few seconds, I sat there in disbelief. It wasn't possible. No one had warned me. No one had asked permission. It was as if a hurricane had targeted my property, and only my property. But then I saw it, parked right in front of my house with a white pickup truck with a bold blue logo of the Oak Ridge HOA plastered on its door. It hit me like a brick. They did it. The HOA had come onto my land and cut down every single tree. Without warning. Without consent. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. A rage I hadn't felt in years simmered beneath my skin, the kind of cold, calculated fury that doesn't explode but freezes everything around it. I knew I was looking at a crime scene. Trespassing. Destruction of private property. And I also knew exactly how this would end. Because what the HOA president, Veronica Slater, didn't realize was that Maxwell Reeve, was a federal judge. And Veronica was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Chapter 1. A powder keg waiting to explode. For months after I moved into Oak Ridge Estates, I kept to myself. I had no intention of involving myself in neighborhood drama. I paid cash for my house, made no improvements that required permits, and never signed a single agreement binding me to the HOA's rules. My lot was old, my house historic, and the trees, they were part of its soul. Some of them were over 70 years old. They provided shade in the summer, privacy all year round, and an almost spiritual connection to the land's history. Veronica Slater, however, saw things differently. She was the self-appointed queen of Oak Ridge. Platinum blonde hair always perfectly styled, designer blouses crisp and immaculate, and a smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. From the moment I moved in, she made it her mission to remind me that I was not exempt from her kingdom. First came the polite notices in the mailbox, suggestions about trimming the hedges, repainting the fence, removing unsightly lawn ornaments. Then came the violations, accusing me of failing to conform to the community aesthetic. I ignored them. Every letter went straight into the trash. Veronica, apparently, took that as a challenge. Chapter 2. The day everything changed. When I stepped out of my car that evening and surveyed the devastation, it was surreal. The yard, once vibrant and alive, now looked like a battlefield after an air raid. Freshly cut would perfume the air, but it wasn't the scent of renewal. It was loss. It was destruction. I walked slowly up the path, crunching over fallen twigs. Every step fed the fire inside me. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't a mistake. It was an act of war. And there she was. Veronica Slater stood next to the HOA truck like a general surveying conquered territory. Her arms were crossed, but her smirk was anything but professional. "Mr. Reeve," she greeted me with fake warmth. "I'm so glad you're here. We were just making some adjustments to ensure community harmony." I stared at her in silence for a few beats. She expected outrage. She wanted me to explode, to yell, to give her ammunition. But I wasn't going to play her game. "So let me understand this," I said quietly. "You enter my property without permission and cut down trees that have been here longer than most of the houses in this neighborhood." Her smirk faltered, but she recovered quickly. "The HOA has jurisdiction over community aesthetics, and your trees were not compliant. They disrupted the uniform look we're striving for in Oak Ridge Estates." I gave a slow nod, as if considering her words. "Then you won't mind if I take this to court?" Her eyes widened, but she tried to laugh it off. "Oh, there's no need for that. We're within our rights." I stepped closer, holding her gaze. "I'm a federal judge." Her face drained of color. In that moment, I wished I had a camera to capture her expression. All the arrogance, All the smug superiority evaporated in an instant. You trespassed. You damaged private property. You destroyed trees that, by law, require permits for removal. What you've done isn't an HOA infraction. It's a crime. Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her hands, once confidently folded, now hung limply at her sides. Without another word, I turned and walked into my house. I already knew how this was going to end. Chapter 3. The Judge's Playbook. I spent that night at my desk, methodically laying out my next move. The first step was gathering evidence. My home security system had captured everything. The trucks rolling in, workers with chainsaws, trees falling one by one. I backed up the footage 3 times, sending copies to secure cloud storage and an external hard drive. Then I dove into Oak Ridge HOA's public records. As I suspected, my property was never legally under their jurisdiction. When Oak Ridge Estates was incorporated, several historic homes were explicitly exempted. Mine was one of them. That alone made the destruction of my property an illegal act. But it was just the beginning. Chapter 4. Uncovering the Rot. Over the next week, I performed a deep dive into the HOA's financial records. What I found was appalling, but unsurprising. Large payments for landscaping services that had never occurred. Transfers to shell companies. Funds funneled into personal accounts, including Veronica's. Fraud. Embezzlement. Misuse of community funds. It was a nest of corruption. But I wasn't content with legal technicalities. I wanted justice. I started making quiet visits to my neighbors. Frank Nichols from across the street, whose rose garden had been torn out without warning. Marlene and Dan Whitaker, fined repeatedly for their unapproved patio furniture. Within days, I had a small but determined group of residents who were ready to listen. When I showed them the financial discrepancies, jaws dropped. "They're robbing us blind," Frank muttered, flipping through the reports. "Every year they raise the dues, and we never see a damn thing for it. They bullied us," Marlene said quietly. "And we let them. Not anymore." Chapter 5. Turning the Tide. Within days, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Veronica tried to contain the damage, but it was like holding back a flood with a paper umbrella. The HOA's carefully maintained illusion of control disintegrated. Then came the letter, delivered by courier, stamped with the HOA's seal. It was a masterclass in condescension and deflection. They claimed my trees had been a safety hazard. They expressed regret for the inconvenience. And, most absurd of all, they warned me I'd face fines if I replanted without HOA approval. I laughed. I filed the letter away. It would be Exhibit A. But first, it was time for Veronica to feel the heat. Chapter 6. The Walls Close In. I filed formal complaints with the city. An environmental investigation was launched, and inspectors soon arrived to survey the damage. They confirmed that several of the trees were protected by law. The HOA was slapped with an initial fine exceeding $50,000. I forwarded my evidence of financial fraud to the state auditor's office. As a federal judge, I knew the process well and how to expedite it. Within a month, an official investigation was underway. HOA bank accounts were frozen. Subpoenas were issued. Veronica? She called an emergency meeting, a last-ditch effort to stem the revolt. Chapter 7. Judgment Day. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse. Tense whispers filled the room. Veronica stood at the podium, her mask of control slipping as she stammered through excuses. Clerical errors, she claimed. Operational oversights. She tried to shift blame, pleading ignorance. I waited until she mentioned the trees. Then I stood. Silence. "You want to talk about oversight?" I said, placing a thick folder on the table. "These are the records of every fraudulent transaction for the past 2 years. Payments to non-existent companies. Money funneled into personal accounts. All authorized by you." Gasps echoed around the room. "And here," I continued, holding up the city's report, "is confirmation of illegal tree removal. The HOA will be fined, and a criminal investigation is underway." Chaos erupted. Residents shouted, demanded refunds, demanded justice. Then Veronica's phone rang. She answered, her face darkening as she listened. When she hung up, she whispered, "The HOA is being dissolved." Chapter 8. Justice Served. Veronica Slater sold her house within a week. Rumor had it she moved across the country to avoid the fallout. Oak Ridge elected a new board, honest people this time. And me? I stayed. My yard, stripped of its trees, was now a symbol of something greater. Not just justice, but a warning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stoop to threats. I simply did what I do best. I upheld the law. And as I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over my scarred land, I knew the roots of justice had already begun to grow. Epilogue. Sometimes, the people who think they're untouchable forget the most important truth. No one is above the law. And if you ever forget that, well, you might end up like Veronica Slater.